I'm John Travis in Novato, California, talking to Barbara Findeisen in Tubac, Arizona, just south of Tucson, an artist colony that had the honor of visiting some years ago. It is the 19th of June, 2020, and we're going to find out more about who you are and why. What led you to do all the wonderful things that people hopefully already know about you. But I'm going to get behind the scenes, find out where you were born, what your family was like, what your birth order was, schooling, all that stuff. So take it away, Barbara.
Do you want that stuff?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's the good juicy starting place.
Okay. Well, I was born in Los Angeles, raised in Los Angeles, went through public schools, and then attended Stanford in the Bay Area and stayed in the Bay Area and raised my children there. So, but I was anyway, before I moved to Arizona, I was definitely a Californian.
I remember, that's when I met you. Now, back with your parents, what siblings, birth order, what did your mom and dad do? And
my dad was a policeman. My mom was a homemaker. She was a family intellectual, read a lot, and I had books, and I was almost a professional dancer. I danced in some movies, things.
Wow.
In the chorus. So I had a really pleasant childhood. I loved school. I had a lot of friends, and I loved dancing, and then I went to Stanford.
Any siblings?
Yes, an older brother and an older sister.
So you were the baby of the family?
I was the baby of the family.
Did they treat you well?
My brother teased me a lot. My sister was extremely intelligent and very critical. But that's just the way she was. So, and my brother, yeah, we just kind of had a very normal, no big sicknesses. My mother was very interested in fruits and vegetables and eating right, and way before it was popular. And so we were all very healthy. So it was a good time for me. And I had a lot of wonderful friends, and I loved school.
Uh-huh. Well, knowing the nature of your work, I'm guessing that your childhood may have had some influence on your later work.
I'm sure it did. I also very early on got interested in the Bible. We were not a religious family. We didn't go to church, so I always went to Sunday school. That was my interest. And my mother's father was interested in metaphysics in Boston. So I had a very early kind of introduction to the world of spirit. And that has followed me to all my life.
Mm-hmm. What kind of Sunday school did you go to?
Presbyterian.
Uh-huh. And then were you involved in the New Thought movement that was coming into?
My mother was.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to a church in LA that was that. So I kind of was, but I was also so busy being a teenager. And, yeah.
Did you date a lot? Were you one of the class presidents or any kind of high school?
Well, yeah, I was into politics. I was president of the student, the group. In those days, they had a girl for the women. And so I was president of the women and on committees and really involved. And it was wartime.
True, yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
And then you got to Stanford, and how was that?
Well, I didn't know one single solitary person, and my mother dropped me off, and I loved Stanford. I still love Stanford, and I had a wonderful time there. And they were a little bit worried, those of us who were public school kids, and they did a study, and they discovered that because of so many kids going to private schools, the freshman year they did better than the kids from public school, but the kids from public school had all caught up by the sophomore year. So I really love Stanford. It was great. I met so many wonderful people.
What was your major?
I majored in education. I was going to be a teacher. I did not like psychology at all. I took one course and it was so mechanical, leaving out any soul, any heart, anything. So I thought, boy, that's not something I ever want to do. And I was hired to teach grammar school in Palo Alto. So I got married in the summer and started teaching school in the fall.
And was your husband a fellow student, or how did you meet and how did that happen?
My husband?
Yeah.
Well, that was the first year after the war. And I didn't date one man or boy who hadn't been at war. And so my husband was in the South Pacific for 4 years, and I met him at a fraternity party.
Oh. So you dated then through college and then got married?
I met him the last year, I think it was, and he came from Pasadena, which is right where I grew up. Mm-hmm. So anyway, they did very kind of ordinary. And I got into one interesting thing throughout my life. There have been little things that came to me, hard to express. It was like little miracles almost. Like I met a woman at Stanford whose husband was a law school professor. And she had a group of women, and they invited me to attend, though I was a student. They were studying all kinds of altered states of consciousness and all the was going on with metaphysics and new thought. And so I was really lucky. I got involved with that group and learned so much. We read Alice Bailey and all kinds of people I wouldn't have necessarily been fortunate enough to know of even. So, and that just was another step into being interested in the power of the mind and the soul. And mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I was the only student in it, but it was a very enlightening, great opportunity for me to learn.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and that's happened a lot to me.
Yeah.
Just people come into my life that mean tremendous growth for me.
Great. And how did your teaching career go?
I loved it. I loved it. It's also why I became a psychologist, because there were kids that were not being, even in Palo Alto, that were troubled. And so I taught school the next 2 years in Palo Alto in the mornings, and then drove to San Francisco to get my degree in psychology.
Oh, what at San Francisco?
And I also had 3 kids by that time.
Oh, wow.
So
you did your psych training at what, San Francisco State or?
No, at the University of San Francisco.
UCSF,
Yeah.
Or no, the University of San Francisco is different than UCSF. Only recently.
And it was a class in a lot of alternative work. We had a lot of the people who were that were beginning to move the consciousness come and talk to us, and that just put me. Though I went there because of almost an accident, it was one I could afford, and also one that, I could get to and teach school in the morning. So, but it was wonderful. Just,
Now,
I loved it.
this is in the 50s?
Uh, no, not quite. It was I started because I had my first prenatal experience early in the 50s. So it's right there. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Wow. And then 3 kids. Since prenatal is your area of expertise,
Yeah.
tell us what your prenatal experiences were like and how that led to your work.
Yeah. Well, I looked around for a doctor who would give me more alternatives. And I found one, and I said, I don't want to have medication, and I just want to do that. And I didn't know anything about prenatal psychology. I just wanted to have a natural birth without knowing why in the heck I did, but I did. And so I had all my children naturally, and no problems.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also beginning for me for some little ways. Like my second son was not going to get born. I mean, the doctor said he doesn't want to come, Barbara, go on home. So that was unusual for a doctor not to force me into having forced labor or something. So I went home, I went to bed, and that son, Mark, that night turned himself around and was born the right way, so to speak. And that is a pattern in his life. He was my wildest kid, but he always turned himself around and came out smelling like a rose. So, and I noticed that. I didn't know what it meant, but I thought that was funny.
So did you have any awareness of, this was before any of the work in prenatal psychology was even talked about, I presume. What awareness did you have of them as prenates?
No one mentioned it in grad school at all. And I read Art Janoff's book and also Stan Groff's work, and they mentioned birth. And then I had an experience that really threw me into the world of prenatal psychology. I didn't understand it. My therapist didn't understand it. And what it was I was doing primal therapy, and it was three weeks, I think, and every day for 2 or 3 hours. And for 3 days, all I did in therapy was tremble. I didn't have any feelings. There was no content. I just would come in and lie down on the mat and tremble. And that's all. And then one day, the third day, I looked up at the therapist because she was lost too, didn't know what the heck was going on, and neither did I. But I had no feelings. It was just my body. And so I looked up at the therapist and said, I can't be afraid of my mother. She loves babies. And then went back into trembling. And that was so upsetting. Well, I just didn't understand it at all. And neither did my therapist. So I went on a quest, which I'm probably still on, but I went on a quest to find out, does anybody know anything about that? And I met Tom Verney, and I met, of course, with Stan, and I started going to everything I could find out about it. And I was always, I think I was a practicing therapist by then, and because I'd gotten my license. And I went to France to meet Miriam Seger, because a friend of mine in San Francisco sent me information about her. And it was a psychiatrist who started realizing that babies were conscious. And so the hospitals in Paris would call her in to talk to the babies if there was a problem. And so I flew over to Paris and stayed there for a couple of days, and not with her, but I spent a lot of time with her. And she had remarkable, just her work, and now it's all over France. They have a organization called, my French is no good, The Cause of the Babies. And she found out that, like one day she was talking to a woman who, the baby was failure to thrive, and the woman was, not doing very well, and the baby was definitely not doing very well. And so they called Miriam in, and the woman had refused to give in France, you had to give the name of the father, and she refused to do that. And so Miriam was talking to her, and all of a sudden Miriam said, "Oh, your boss is the father." And the woman was very shocked, and she said, "How do you know that?" And Miriam said, "The baby just told me."
Wow.
So that, and not long, I just went to, and one person I worked with was somebody, Morris Netherton, because he was one of the few people that I met. He was giving a lecture at a college in California that knew anything. And I said, in intermission, I said, "Do you know anything about people who have memories before they're born?" Because I was wondering what had happened to me. And so he said, "Oh, yes, Barbara, listen, if I could only work with one person," and he's a past life therapist, okay? "If I can only work with one person, I would work at the prenatal level." So I worked with him for a while, and then I got involved with the Association for Pre and Perinatal Psychology with David Chamberlain and Tom Burney, and lots of people, Klaus, and it was wonderful. And I'm growing up 3 kids, but I'm traveling, we're going to conferences. I met Bobby's son and had some wonderful experiences, and was I became vice president, and then I was ultimately president of the organization. But I learned so much, and I learned so much about prenatal psychology, and then I thought, I've got to find a way for people to bring up those memories. And since I was a therapist and I was beginning to create STAR, my program, I started, I'm not a hypnotherapist, but I started putting people into kind of a trance-like quiet, and taking them just to completely relax and, just relaxed. And that, I'm not at all attached to people believing me, but I've seen so much that I never would have believed, like experiences before they incarnated, and not wanting to come to that mother, and just all kinds of strange things, and things I didn't believe, but I sure believe them now. And the whole, how do I get people into it, and how do I deal with it, and then how do we restore it, how do we retrieve, how do we heal it? And so that's basically been my work for probably 50 years. I've been doing that all over the world, actually. So quietly, in my little way, doing amazing, because the people, it's not new that babies count. I mean, there was poetry, there's Wordsworth's beautiful poem, and there are myths, and even like the Christ child, And that's not just Christianity. There are many ancient religions that have a holy child in it. And so what's holy, but probably soul child. And so, and I've had people, I had an engineer come to STAR, and he, yeah, sure, I'll do a group birth regression. And so he had some strange experiences, and he'd asked his mother before he came, what about his birth? And she said, oh, it was perfectly normal and fine. And this has happened a lot. And he had this experience that he got stuck in the womb and he couldn't get out. And it was a big struggle for him, and he got really afraid. And so after the regression, before he went home, he wrote down everything he experienced, like 7 different things he experienced in the regression. And when he went home, he invited his mother for dinner and said, can you tell me about my birth? And all 7 things that he had experienced, she talked about. And how does it affect his life? He said, you, he said that don't get in my way. If anybody gets in my way, their history, I've always been like that. Just get out of my way. I'm going to do what I want to do. And it stems straight from that. So I've had so many experiences like that. And I remember there was a woman who came to the program, and she had cancer. And so I was working with her. Of course, I worked with everybody, but it's like, and in the process of the birth, when she came through, we do it on the floor on a mattress. When she came out, she said it was, I have a lot of this on videotape, but she was very, very still. And this is what she said to me. She wasn't talking to me, she was just saying it. I've come to the land of the dead people. That's what she said. She died a few months later, but she had, her father was a judge, and she had a family that had no heart. And she felt never had any love. And, but that was so weird to see this woman there saying, I've come to the land of the dead. And I guess from a spiritual point of view, or from just a loving point of view, you could probably feel that because we know all of this in attachment, we're mammals. I mean, people forget we are mammals.
Yeah.
If we don't get touched, there's a problem. Just like a little lamb, if the mother lamb dies, the little lamb dies. Mm-hmm. They have to cut the skin off the mother to put around the baby lamb, so that to fool the baby. So it's like we forget we're mammals, and we have some needs that are built in. I mean, touch is one of them. Safety.
Movement is a big one too, with Jim Prescott's work.
The what?
The movement being.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, and I'm still fascinated, with what I learn every time I do a session. A woman who's 80, I live in here, came to see me because a friend of hers said, why don't you go see Barbara? And she did. And she's 80, husband's dying, has been dying for 9 years. And so I started talking to her, and she said something, well, Barbara, I'm afraid to walk out the door every morning. The only time I've ever felt safe in my life, she said, was when I walked into my classroom, because that was my classroom. And I loved the children. loved the kids, and they're still writing to her 20 years later.
Wow.
So anyway, I said, my little pre and perinatal mind. So I casually one day said to her, do you know anything about your birth? Oh, yes, she said, I nearly killed my mother. I was too big. My nose is too big. I'm just too big. My mother just almost died giving birth to me, and it was my fault. So she's lived with that at the unconscious level all of her life, that she almost killed her mother. And so we talked about that and we worked with it. And it's so fun for me, really, to realize she now is, for the first time in her life, doesn't live afraid, fine to walk out the door, fascinated with her own mind and her own history, and fun. She's a fun person now. Oh, and that, you know, I'm a believer, you can tell I'm a believer, that this is true. What happened to us back there stays with us. And we can heal it. We can bring it up to consciousness. And I also do something for, after I've worked with somebody, how do we heal it, or anything left, or what do we want to do? We do art about it, here at the ranch anyway, where you can do anything. And well, you know, we can't do anything, but you do things like that. And she's a joyous person. And you know, she's 80 years old. So not too late for anybody.
You yourself must be pushing 80 years.
Oh no, I'm 90.
Oh, so, really?
Yeah, I'm 90.
So you're working with youngsters then?
Yeah, and the other thing for myself personally is I don't have fear. I'm sure I would if a snake crawled into my office right now from the desert, things like that. But I don't live with a lot of negative thinking. And why did you do that, Barbara? Criticism of myself. Well, I used to be very critical of myself, and you know, I trust. I have a lot of trust and a lot of faith, and I'm just more at peace. And because I think I've healed a lot of the fear, and I think so does the client I'm talking about right now. She's healed what made her afraid.
I'm remembering you're talking about your trembling, that I think it's Peter Levine talking about a normal mammalian response after trauma is to shake, but humans don't do that. And I noticed my daughter, when she was little, would shake after something. She'd cry and, you know, discharge the energy, but we're taught not to do that. So yeah, does that make sense in terms of you three whole sessions of shaking? But yeah, did that help reduce your fear?
Yeah. Does it what? Yeah.
The trembling, it would be a fear reduction, physiological. Yeah, we're mammals, all right.
We're mammals. And somehow or other that drops out of most people's mind.
Yeah.
But there are mammalian things that if you don't get, there is a problem.
As John Bowlby and what's her name that I met in Baltimore briefly, blackened names this morning. The other attachment person with Bowlby and the American woman that did The Strange Situation. Yeah, you know, I'll think of her name in a minute. So going back to your STAR program, STAR stands for something, I believe, but I don't remember what.
It's ridiculous in a way. We never use it, but it stands for self-analysis toward awareness rebirth.
Okay.
So that's what it stands for.
That makes sense.
Yeah, with the work. And people say, why, when they come, it's what birth got to do with anything?
Yeah.
And I say, well, it sets some patterns that are probably still with you, you know? So,
I
And
like the expression, I don't remember, but I'll never forget.
that's good. That's really great. That's good. Yeah,
So,
and then we work on the mindfulness and things like that. And one of the things that helps heal all of that is you get in touch with your inner child, or get in touch with whatever you want to call it, but have some talk with yourself of a loving nature. Because so many people come into therapy and they hate themselves and they're angry at themselves. And so no wonder you're not happy. So we talk about, write yourself a loving letter. And we do some simple things like that just to begin to get the person to give themselves some good news. Not the kind Trump gives himself all the time, but yeah, because that's so sick. But it's like, appreciate yourself. Just, you're important. You're, whatever you want to say to yourself, start changing the talk. And I've been doing that with my 80-year-old client, and she's having some fun and doing some things she hadn't done, and it's in standing up for herself, which she's never done in her whole life.
yeah.
And
Never too late.
What?
It's never too late.
It's never too late. I know. Absolutely not.
I want to go back to your history of your STAR program, because when I met you, it was through Bob Fees, who...
Oh, really? Barbara.
Yeah, I've lost track of him. He somewhere in the Southwest, but when he left Santa Rosa, he was the doctor's doctor. All the doctors' families would go to him. A really sweet man. And I remember him speaking about you so fondly, and that he'd go up. You had your STAR program. You had a retreat up north somewhere around Healdsburg or where?
Geyserville.
Geyserville, yeah. And he would go up there and help out or do something. And I'd hear about that before I actually met you. And then I tracked you down at some point. But how did the STAR program, you were doing primal therapy, and you got a psychology doctorate, and how did that first, how did the name arise, and when you decided that was going to be your life work?
Okay. There was a psychic in Berkeley and a doctor who got together and were working with people. And I got to know them. And from my knowing them, I said, I'm going to create a program, not just what they're doing, but what's about birth, about soul, about life, all levels. And so I did. And I'd been, being a Southern, Californian, I'd done EST, I'd done actualizations, I'd done all this stuff, and worked with Stan. And so I just put together a lot of things that worked for me. And birth was certainly one of them. And then I put together a program with homework, things to write about, like write your dad all the problems you had with him, just how do we get down there and start cleaning out all the negativity that we carry. And then we've got to put something good in it. So that's a simple way of looking. And it's, we do feelings. I think it's important to express yourself.
When did this first, the first people that you
worked with? Yeah. Well, I did it from my house in Palo Alto. One day the priest came by, but I was doing, I just started, I was working at a clinic in Palo Alto. And so somebody said to me, Barbara, there's something going on in the basement of the Lutheran church. I think you might enjoy it. And they need some help. And so I took a course, and that was the basic. And I talked to them, and they said, yeah, do use it. So, and so I kept honing in with, I knew something new. I always tried it to see what the value of it was, and would put it in and take something out if I found something better, or someone about my staff. And the thing I had, one of the things I had learned was that one way people defend themselves is by not showing up. And so you can easily hide in a big group. So I have almost as many staff per person. Almost everybody has a staff person. The most one staff ever has is 2 people. And so they get a lot of attention from all of us, but they have somebody that, you know, talks to them every day, monitors them, goes over their homework with them, reads, you know, stuff. And it's a, there, you know, this is a funny thing to say, but I've been doing STAR for a long time. And the thing I noticed at the very last Sunday is you could take the love in the room that they have for each other and cut it with a pair of scissors. I mean, it's just, and a lot of them stay connected. They become best friends and help each other and call each other and things. But, and I don't say you're going to learn how to love everybody. I don't say that. I don't. But it's like they're a group of strangers at the beginning. And by the end, they're the closest people to them in the world sometimes.
Yeah, it's amazing what an intensive group can do. Like I've done a number of Stan Dale's workshops with they call it the Room of Love, and you know how you can get close to strangers. And it's the lost community that we've destroyed by our losing our villages, and we're hardwired for connection, and we don't get it. So what was the date of the very first STAR event, just to historically peg it to?
I'd only have to guess. It was probably mid-50s.
Really, that early?
Huh. Oh, yeah.
Because it was the 80s when I met or learned about the
oh, yeah, no, I started doing it probably by the end of the 50s. I was doing it.
I was still in high school.
Yeah. And then I was doing it in my living room. I was renting places because it's a noisy process. And then I met somebody came to STAR, and he went to Esalen, and I introduced him to Stan. And he said that, you know, Barbara, you and Stan need a place to work. And I said, yeah, that'd be nice. And but he said, I'm going to buy you someplace. So he bought us a place in Geyserville, and we used it for 10 years. So
that was in the late 70s, early 80s?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably the 70s.
And was Stan there with you?
My son?
No, you were mentioning Stan. I assumed it was Stan Groff.
Well, Stan used it. He did his workshops there. He didn't do STAR, and I've done holotropic. I do holotropic breath work, and I do it in every STAR group. So, and yes, so that's what happened. And we bought and remodeled this place on 20 acres in the wine country, and it was wonderful. And Stan came, and a lot of the people came from the New Age community. So
then you wound up going to Arizona. How did that come about?
Well, there was a very conservative Republican who moved next door, but next door was miles away, sort of. And he started complaining because we shared a road, and we took care of the road. Anyway, he said I was a witch. And he said we had gay bathhouses, and he put just horrible things about, and you know, I'm pretty waspy. I mean, you know, blonde, blue eyes, plain old California girl,
Yeah.
and he was vicious, and the city council believed him. And so the man who owned it said, "We can't use it anymore, Barbara." So he had to sell it. And I thought it was so painful for me that because of my dream, you know,
Yeah.
place. And of course, we've gotten out of the ranch here, but it's different. So I said, I don't ever want to do this again, because we were, Stan, I don't know if you were in on this, but Stan and his wife started the spiritual immunity community, the spiritual, what did they call it? That spiritual things are true, and that they are you can deal with them in psychology. And there was a lot of people, or I don't know a lot, but I certainly was involved with it. And just putting in, they got the DSM code to change so that if you're having a spiritual experience, it's not counted as psychotic.
Uh-huh.
And so I was really involved with that, and including
That's the spiritual emergence.
that's it, spiritual emergence. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that was a huge thing. And
Yeah.
my sister, who was a bipolar, was having a spiritual emergence. And I
Wow,
actually
yeah.
found a person in Denver who was in the network that
Oh,
went to
good.
spend some time with her. And yeah, that was an important contribution. So then how did you wind up in Arizona?
Well, I was living in California and had a private practice and things like that. And people kept calling me. And of course, I'm friends with a lot of people were involved with that, all that stuff going on. And people would call me and say, "Barbara, I've got somebody in a spiritual emergence. Can you see them?" And I said, "No, I don't have a place." And I got remarried. And my husband said, "Oh, I know." The next thing happened is I found a place here in Arizona where I could do it. And it wasn't the ranch. It was not a place that was very good, but it was a place. And so then I got married, and Charlie said, why don't we buy something?" And so I started looking, because I was in Arizona doing it, and I found the ranch, the one we have here. And the woman had been trying to sell it for a long time, but she wouldn't sell it because of a fight she was having with her son-in-law, who was taking insurance money and not fixing up the ranch. So the ranch was a mess. There's holes in the ceiling, fireplaces hanging off the wall. We have 70 something acres. I have a sand tray room. I have a great art room. I have a lot of body work rooms. So we have a big lodge where you can have 50, 100 people, and a great kitchen, a commercial kitchen, because we remodeled it so that I had a sand tray room. I had all the things that I always wanted to. Meditation places. You can sit and overlook the valley. Great swimming pool. So I've been here now for about 10 years.
I think longer, because I came there about 12 years ago when you were.
Well, then I've been here for all that time.
Yeah, I volunteered to do some electrical work on your big.
Oh, wow, great. Oh, that's great.
And I was kind of depressed, and it was a great change of venue for me, and getting to do something productive. This was before my reinvention of myself back when I was 65. And I fondly remember my time there, and the beautiful spot and what you've done to fix it up. So now, what's become of Star? Have you retired from it, or?
Well, I'm trying to sell the ranch. There's somebody looking at it. They came from San Francisco yesterday. And because it's like, there are some things I'd like to do, like not work all the time,
Yeah.
write another book, and go at least see my family in California, because all my kids are in California, and my grandkids and stuff. And I don't get there very often. And right now, I don't get there at all. So I'd just like to, have be less tied to doing the work.
Yeah.
And I've also gotten really interested in, let's see, the name of it is transgenerational trauma, and started to write about that because it happened to me with a client, and I trained her to do STAR in Sweden, and one night she called me, and her father had been a hidden child, and she said, "Barbara, something's happening to me. I'm reliving my father's time hidden in Germany." And then I just listened to her, but it turns out that, and Bruce Lipton was one of my friends, great person. And just what's going on here. And what Bruce says, it takes one of the articles that I read someplace, it takes 2 generations for things to pass, and they go through the grandmother to the daughter to the daughter. And I don't know very much about it yet, but I want to find out about it and write a book about that, and maybe I'm really curious about the soul and how it manifests, and maybe write therapy in the soul, and there are some books with that title, I think. So, yeah, I'm, just, the other thing, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I've met so many wonderful people. I mean, Stan is one of them, just for me to get to hang out and know him. And Bruce Lipton.
Yeah, he comes to Mullumbimby every year. I see him more there than I do in the States because
yeah, that's right. He does. Yeah, I was the one who signed for him to be okay to move to New Zealand.
Right. Yeah, they go to New Zealand every winter, but they also come over to Mullumbimby. And
yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to now explore some of the history of APA, the Association for Pre and Perinatal Birth Psychology and Health, for the viewers that don't know, APPPAH, that you were the president of, and I assumed you were one of the founding members, but
well, I was.
You got in early, I think. And
yeah, first thing they ever had.
First what?
First meeting they ever had.
Oh, okay. And when was that? Do you know?
No, I don't do numbers. It was in Toronto, and I'd heard Tom speak at a church in Palo Alto, and I was already interested in birth, of course, and so I've been there ever since and gone to everything ever since.
So. Well, and Tom is Tom Verney for our viewers, who wrote The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, which
yes, that was the book that really started it.
Yeah, and he's Canadian, so it makes sense that it was in Toronto to start with.
Yeah.
And I've never actually met him. I'm hoping I can interview him. I know he's fairly introverted, but I'm hoping that with a good word from you, he'll agree to be interviewed, along with Stan Groff, who's also on my list. But this first meeting then, and now was I remember meeting, what's his name, Janus from Germany at another meeting. There was a European group as well.
Yes, they were ahead of us. They had a group before we did, and they used to come to our conferences, and we'd go to theirs. And
was their group inspired by Tom's book, or was there a prior to that book, was there any literature?
I think they were doing something before Tom's book,
Uh-huh.
but I'm only guessing at that. So,
Hopefully I'll get that from him directly. But
yeah.
as it evolved and unfolded, I know I've been to several meetings, though most of them were in the winter when I was in Australia. So
Uh-huh.
haven't been to too many meetings.
Oh,
But,
Grant. Do you remember Grant? Graham from Australia? The
uh,
doctor very early on was into this. Graham Front. No?
oh, I don't know him, but I knew a Dr. John something or other who told me about him and his widow. I think he had died when I
Wow.
was in Melbourne. So I've heard about him, but never met him. No, it was after my or before my
Yeah,
time.
he was wild. He was, yeah, very, but because he was saying things that people thought were just totally nuts. But now we know they're not nuts.
Yeah. Well, and then it was David Chamberlain that invited me to be on a panel in it was December of '95. It was a landmark. It's actually where Bruce and Margaret met. They describe it in The Honeymoon Effect. So, they were at that conference, and that's when Margaret was zinged by Bruce and developed their relationship. But for me, it was the first time I had encountered this. I met Jim Prescott there, whose book blew my mind. I'd already been into the continuum concept with Gene Liedloff, but he had the science behind it, and met Michael Mendiza, and then I met Marilyn Milos, who recruited me to join the no-circ crowd, and they needed more doctors. And I'm curious, just an aside here, whether your star work, you've done any work with healing circumcision trauma.
Say that again.
Have you encountered circumcision trauma in
yes,
star work?
Absolutely. In Marilyn Milos, yeah. Yes, I have. And adoption, and oh gosh, what they know, and but the one thing about adoption that I sometimes try to, it's wonderful, absolutely great. And some people, you know, one person I've worked with did not have a happy adoptee but it's a wonderful thing to do. But what the mothers, I hope they're hearing differently, but the baby has already had a mother.
Yeah,
I mean,
9 months.
And that mother is in the baby's brain, you know?
Yeah.
The mother is already been there, and the baby knows it, and has been, reads her energy, reads her moods, you know, all of that. And so when you say, I'm going to love this baby just like the biological mother, it's naive.
Yeah, yeah. It was that same meeting. I remember a woman describing when she met her birth mother. She said it was like finding a glove that fitted. I'll never forget her words, and that just got me. That,
what did she say?
That it was like finding a glove that fits my hand.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I don't remember her name, but that was one of the many things from that amazing meeting in December of '95 that then led to my being part of the Mother Friendly Childbirth Initiative, where I met Suzanne Arms and Ray Castellino and Tina Kimmel and all these folks up there. And Jim Prescott invited me, and so it was a really juicy time, a career shift for me. And then we had our summit in Mount Madonna, and I remember you let me stay at your wonderful apartment in Santa Cruz. That was such a treat.
Oh, yeah. I think I chaired one in Santa Cruz.
Yeah. So
a couple in Santa Cruz. We did them at Asilomar.
Yeah, and so APA has continued to grow. And are there any other paths that we should go down historically, that besides STAR and APA, that you have been devoting a lot of time to?
Yep. Well, I don't think I'd like to write a book. I've written one book, called Womb Tube. Womb Tube. It's just about people's birth stories.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and but also like to write a book about, through this work, people get in touch with their souls.
Mm.
I mean, they find something in themselves that's been there all along.
Mm-hmm.
That this is not religious. It's just an experience of their heart and the goodness in them, and
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Very important.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
it's always there.
now,
And some people have to do one heck of a lot of work to undo what they've created, which I think who knows about Trump, but he's so sick.
Going back in your personal history, your first marriage and your 3 kids, since a lot of my work has been the fact that having children destroys most marriages and nuclear families, because we don't have enough, we're designed to have 3.87 adults per infant to meet everybody's needs. So mathematically, it's a tough call. So you've got the 3 grown kids in California and grandkids, and what is your family dynamics or constellation?
Well, my kids and my grandchildren are all still in California, and I've been sad because I miss some of my grandchildren's childhood because I was always living someplace else.
Yeah.
So,
what do any of them know what you're about, and what do they think of your work? And you don't have to answer that question.
I don't have to answer that question.
Well, in the case of my daughter, she doesn't think much of most of my stuff. She thinks I'm crazy.
Yeah. Well, I remember my daughter and my older son have both done STAR, and
okay.
Yeah, worked it, and I've gotten into the Course in Miracles, and they've done that. My other son, the one who turned himself around, has not gotten interested at all. But when he was in high school, he's would bring somebody over. It was Gun High School in Palo Alto, but my son Mark would bring somebody, and because he said to them, "You got to talk to my mom." So he would bring some friends of his who were going through a rough spate and tell me to talk to them. So, but he didn't want anything to do with it. So, but he's got 3
appreciated it.
kids. He's been a great dad. He is a great dad. So,
well, are there any final parting words of wisdom for future generations that we hope will benefit from our time together?
Yeah. Well, that we're a multidimensional people, that we have more, we're sometimes not manifesting what we know and what we can manifest in healing and love. And, when we look at the world with how we treat people, that's not natural for us. But we're basically created to help and respond.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an interesting thing that's going on right now, but I think it's more than just what it looks like.
And the idea that we're more empathic than competitive, which is getting some scientific validation after years of what was all that stuff in the 80s of the territorial imperative and all of those books back in the 70s.
And the power of the mind with all this mindfulness stuff.
Yeah.
So powerful. Yeah. You can heal yourself in many ways.
Well, it's been a delight to get to know you better. And I'm so glad that you've shared this for future generations. And thank you. I'm going to stop the recording, and we can have a little post-recording chat. So.
Well, listen, it was really fun to see you again and fun to do this.
Likewise. Okay.
Yeah.